Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode here from yours truly, GUIGLIT, your one-stop shop for all things books, beards and beyond. Whether it's GCSE or A-level revision hints and tips, GUIGLIT has you covered. Today we'll be looking at Arthur Miller's play All My Sons. This is a subscriber request which I'm happy to oblige on and I hope it helps you out a lot. And today we're looking at context behind the play as well as the theme of morality in the text. As always, be sure to give this video a thumbs up, share it with everybody you know, and hit that bell icon for more of all the things GUIGLIT produces. Don't forget also, we are across various different social media platforms, so give us a follow on Twitter, give us a follow on Instagram, and join us on TikTok as well. It would be great to have you there. So, with this video, as always, what can you do? Take down notes, comment. Don't forget the GUIGLIT guarantee. I respond to every single comment I receive, and I respond within 24 to 48 hours of that. In addition, test yourself as you go. Make sure we've got an understanding of what quotes I use, what information I provide. Be sure to track back through the video itself, and repeat. Learning is proven to be more effective the more you do it, so it's really important to make sure that it is done on a repeat level. Now, a few points on context regarding the play itself. So the play comes out just after the start of the Second World War, and it's inspired by real events. If you are to look up the Curtiss Wright Aeronautical Corporation from Ohio, their use of faulty gear and faulty equipment in the Second World War leading to the deaths of soldiers in the American Army is a real event that inspired Arthur Miller to write this play. In addition, it's set in post-World War II society, so America is just finding itself for the first time on the world stage. It is a global superpower in a way that it's never been before. And it's this sense of questioning identity that we see from a number of the characters, whether it's members of the Keller family or beyond, what their role is in society, how is that shaped, and what their purpose is. And they're kind of a microcosm for America on the global stage itself. In addition, it focuses on these ideas of war profiteering. Big criticisms from various commissions ran by Congress at the time demonstrate this idea of people making money from the war effort rather than thinking of the social national interest, as it were. People looking for their own self-interests of making money off the backs of war rather than it simply being for the greater good and the wider cause. In addition, it's also influenced by the structure of classical Greek drama. Now, this is really important for assessment objective 3. Miller's play here is not only taking inspiration and hints from Henrik Ibsen, the Swedish playwright, and I'd encourage you to go and have a look at his plays, but also in terms of the moral compass that is really infused in Greek drama. This idea of how the individual plays out in society, but also their morality and their reckoning from doing immoral acts is really reminiscent of how the classical Greek dramas play out. And also we have this idea of the difference here between society and family. Miller writes this play at a time when materialism and greater living standards are increasing and people are able to buy more for themselves and think more for themselves in terms of their individual demands and wants and needs rather than the greater good of societies. So like this quote here from Miller where he describes Joe Keller as not a partner in society but an incorporated member. The play relies on this kind of contextual dilemma of, is it the person that's important and the person's wants and needs, or is it the greater good of society? So where does society end and family begin? Where does society end and the individual begin? All really important points. And that last point of individual responsibility, America is inherently wrapped up in this notion of the American dream, this idea that every individual can thrive and aspire and succeed and achieve, and how Joe Keller's immoral actions play out in the play, and do they benefit just him, or is he doing it to protect his family, and how much do they take away from society? So I'm going to look at a few things in terms of morality here, and how the characters respond to it, how the characters' fates are determined by morality, but also some key quotes I'd encourage as well. So there is, at the start of the play, and I would argue throughout the play, an atmosphere of self-interest over community, that morality is sacrificed at the whims and advantages of the self and the individual. To take this quote from Chris Keller, men killed themselves for each other, a little more selfish than they'd have been here today. This notion here from Chris Keller, someone who obviously has this element of survivor's guilt, which we'll get into later, demonstrates the fact that he lives by a creed of what interests and protects and benefits him over everyone else, and this idea of the self taking over the greater good, and however that impacts on morality, as seen by his own father. In addition, there's always a price to be paid for amorality. We see this at the end in Joe Keller taking his own life, and the idea that the things he's lived with and the consequences of them finally get to him. To quote the character of Jim Bayless here, Frank is right. Every man does have a star, the star of one's honesty, and you spend your life groping for it, but once it's out, it never lights again. Notice this metaphor of the star, the ambition, this sense of reaching for the stars, but also this idea of it never lights again. It's kind of an ominous foreshadowing and a parallel here to Joe Keller's own immoral actions, this idea that his honesty being tarnished and trashed means he as a person is tarnished and trashed. And it's really important to notice that as a kind of parallel to the fortunes and fate of the play's protagonist. In addition, what are the consequences of morality leading on to that, or lack thereof of morality? Some of these are direct. We look at the arrest of Steve Deaver, who's sacrificed in a metaphorical and figurative sense by Joe Keller when the faulty airplane parts are noticed and he is arrested. And we see that there's a very clear consequence of immoral business practices. Some of it, however, is a little more ambiguous. We see that Larry Keller's MIA status, that he's missing in action, hangs over a lot of the play. And this is kind of I would argue this is a kind of connection and a metaphor for the wider consequences of being immoral. Okay, is Larry alive? In which case it kind of justifies in some regards the things that Joe Keller has done, or instead, is he dead? At which point it shows the real consequences behind what Joe has done. In Larry Keller being missing in action from the very start of the play, we have this sense of, is there an ambiguity to Joe Keller's immoral deeds? Because it hasn't directly impacted on his own family as of yet. However, we also have this idea of more dilemma that comes from immorality. Do we face guilt, or do the characters instead move on from the guilt? Joe Keller very much attempts to move on from the guilt for a lot of the time in the play, the consequences of the guilt faced by his immoral actions. However, it reaches out to him at the end. The fact of Ann Deaver and Chris Keller, do they get together and marry or not, knowing very well what the Deaver family have suffered at the hands of Chris's father. And there's a moral complexity to their relationship in that regard, not to mention the hanging element of Larry there and the wider element of him. And we also see this sense that I mentioned previously of Chris Keller's responsibility towards his fellow soldiers and the morality there. Is he right to have this survivor's guilt, or should he move on? Is it something that is overly consuming him, or is it something that is a justification? Bear in mind he's the only one left alive. And the characters all left alive are all, whether in a justified sense or not, feel a sense of guilt for that or don't. There's a moral question to them surviving. In Chris Keller's case, is it, as he would ask himself, is it right that he survived over his fellow soldiers? And in Joe Keller's sense, is it right that he's not gone to prison when his own business partner did? And here are some important quotes, I think, on morality, just a few I'd like to leave you with before the video finishes up. I think they all play different parts in terms of the theme of morality in the play. So first of all, this quote from Joe Keller: "A little man makes a mistake and they hang him up by the thumbs." Notice this use of hyperbole and exaggeration of hanging by the thumbs. In contrast with a little man, that adjective little man, it almost reinforces this idea of it being a little mistake. Notice this idea of a mistake as well, when the mistakes Joe Keller is involved with almost certainly cost lives. It's way more than that. Joe Keller is very clear in using in his tone of language at this point. He's very confident in his sense that it wasn't him that's caused anything, but equally he deliberately uses exaggeration and hyperbole in certain points, but also understates the very important points in other times. In addition, Chris Keller mentions, "But I am like everybody else now, I'm practical now." Notice the contrast between the pronoun of I'm and everybody, that he feels that he's justified in being practical and hard-headed in life because everybody is. So Chris Keller's self-centered ways and means are justified on the basis that society is hard-headed and self-centered. So he feels that he's justified in that because he's assimilating his practical nature rather than moral, and at the consequence and the cost of suppressing his morality. In addition, another quote here from Chris Keller is, in terms of the points where Joe reveals his deeds and his culpability, he says, "Is that as far as your mind can see? The business. What is that? The world. The business." Here we see this contrast between world and business, and we also see Chris Keller shift here, and this sense that his emotions and morality actually do come into play, and they are not entirely sacrificed. This consequence of business and the world, his shock and dismay at his father figure, not just father figure, but his literal father, letting him down in terms of his immoral deeds. And we see a real shift in Chris's character as a result. And lastly, we have one more here, demonstrating Chris Keller's survivor's guilt. It felt wrong to be alive, to open the bank book, to drive the new car. We see him really get to grasp his morals, but also his guilt at being alive here when his other soldiers are, in a very different way to that first quote we see here by his father, who is very much absolving himself of any blame. So there's a real contrast here between the characters, and we see a real shift in Chris, particularly as the play develops on this sense of morality. In a society, in an environment and an atmosphere where everyone seems to sacrifice their morals at the cost of getting on and making money, we see a development there, particularly in Chris, which doesn't lead to such a dramatic end as it does with his own father taking his own life. So thank you everybody for tuning in, a very quick one there today. I hope you've enjoyed it and it's given you some greater knowledge. Be sure to like, share and subscribe. Be sure to search Gwiglet across all the different social media platforms. It'd be great to have you there. And as always, drop me a comment if you need any help. Remember the Gwiglit guarantee. But until then, take care, all the very best, and bye-bye.